Anyone watching the BAFTAs this week will have seen or at least heard about the moment a racial slur was yelled out. It was the moment John Davidson, a campaigner for Tourette syndrome awareness, yelled a slur as a result of Tourette syndrome. The tick occurred at the time Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo were on stage speaking. Naturally, it was seen as controversial and generated some skepticism from viewers, although it seems many responses have actually been pretty understanding and positive. So why did John, out of all the things he could have shouted, say the N-word? Well, it's due to coprolalia, the involuntary outburst of obscene words or socially inappropriate and derogatory remarks. Tourette has for a long time been seen as a swearing disease, a condition that makes all sufferers swear, and one reason for this is that it gains public attention. Someone like myself that has relatively mild shoulder shrugging and humming tics wouldn't really attract viewers. Someone shouting obscenities would, and this is why sufferers that experience coprolalia are disproportionately shown on TV. CDC says that coprolalia only affects about 1 in 10 people with Tourette. Coprolalia is a complex tic that is difficult to control or suppress, and people who have this tic often feel embarrassed by it. If John shouted a totally unrelated word, this wouldn't have made the headlines. But as he shouted a racist insult whilst 2 black men were on stage, it did. This is how only 10% of sufferers seem to make up 90% of televised cases, and the swearing disease stereotype remains. So why did it seem so intentional? Tourette is involuntary, but tics can be directly related to the environment and often involve something you'd least like to do or say. I've never suffered with coprolalia myself, but my earliest tics involved doing things I hated. Whenever I hated the feeling of a certain texture as a kid, for example, I had to bite it. I hated the sound of grinding my teeth, so this became a tic. I was told to never look at the sun, which then became a tic. For some reason, tics often involve doing things we'd least like to do, and I hope it gives some reassurance when I say that when John shouted the N-word at the BAFTAs, it's because he knew that was the last thing he wanted to say in that situation. A way I hope that people can relate to this is through anxiety or OCD, 2 things that I have suffered with greatly. When we have fears, they take over. If you have a fear of flying, you don't spend the flight worrying that the in-flight movie will be bad or the food will be burnt. The intrusive thoughts go straight to the very worst thing possible, a crash or losing relatives. Our brains are constantly analysing situations. From an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense to obsess about what would keep us safe in our group or get us kicked out, especially what would get us kicked out, and ensuring we stay away from saying things that would hurt, upset or traumatise those around us. From a Tourette syndrome perspective, the brain is constantly firing urges to make movements and vocalisations, and when this environmental analysis is taking place, the things you tell yourself would be the worst thing possible to say in that situation seems to be carried by the current. The current being the gestures, words or phrases caused by Tourette syndrome. And this isn't a new phenomena. The oldest recorded example of what we think Tourette syndrome is comes from a book that translates as The Hammer of Witches, back in 1487. I cannot help myself at all, for so he uses all my limbs and organs, my neck, my tongue and my lungs, whenever he pleases, causing me to speak or cry out. And I hear the words as if they were spoken by myself, but I am altogether unable to restrain them, and when I try to engage in prayer, he attacks me more violently, thrusting out my tongue. For this priest during the Inquisition, tics worsened when in church and when engaging in prayer. The local community would have had the same conversations we are having today. Why do you say these things in church only? I've never heard you say that outside of church. It seems intentional, and it seems forced, but that is the bizarre nature of the condition. And when we learn of the horrendous imprisonments, tortures, executions of witches, both past and present, we know this isn't something that can simply be stopped, especially when their lives literally depended on it. But I feel both parties need to be protected here, those with Tourette syndrome and those that are on the receiving end of physical and or vocal tics. So what's the solution? Is it to tell those with Tourette syndrome they are not welcome? Is it to tell those on the receiving end to just ignore their feelings? Hopefully and surely none of these. I don't think there was an easy answer to this, and the BBC not editing out what was obviously controversial, I don't get that. I assumed they were overthinking whether or not to keep it in as part of the condition, or worried if they censor it out, viewers might ask why they censored it out knowing it was said. I don't know the reasons, but I hope to have a better understanding as to why they made that decision to keep it in at some point. A situation as complex as this needs discussion and not division, and over time we will hopefully come to a resolution.